I started playing Shimmer Sorcs, also known as Korean Taric comp, in the last patch when it became popular. But when the latest patch came out, Taric got nerfed and it seemed like people stopped playing it, so I decided to see if it was still a reliable top 4 comp to one trick after the nerfs. Within a short period of time I was able to hit masters, averaging a third across 20 games, but the best part about playing the comp was that I was hardly ever contested. In my most recent 20 games, I was only ever contested once, so I thought it'd be good to do a guide on how to play at each stage of the game. With 20 days to go until the end of the set, I think you could easily hit masters starting from bronze if you follow this guide. I'm going to go through the comp at the different key stages, showing the best starts in the early game, how to stay strong in the mid to preserve health, and then finally how to cap your board in the late game to secure higher finishes than 4th. Before we get into the comp and how it functions, I want to mention the luck aspect of TFT. As it's a game of variance, it makes one-tricking a comp very risky. Because of that, there are 3 types of games that you can have when one-tricking this comp, with each of them producing a different finish. The first is high rolling. The game just gives you the key units you need at very early stages of the game. You hit a Taric on the opening rounds, or Silco appears in the shop at level 5, or you get perfect augments like a Sword +1, or the overcharged mana font. This is when you will be contesting for 1st or 2nd place, without really having to try, but of course it doesn't happen that often. The second is your average game, and this is where the majority of your climbing in ranked will come from. This type of game is where you'll hit your key units at the typical stages of the game. You'll get Taric around level 5 or 6, and Silco at level 7 when you roll down. You might get one good augment to fit the comp, or pick up a spatula on the carousel to get the Sorc emblem, and you'll get a 4th or a 3rd depending on how strong the lobby is. And lastly is the one game nobody wants, but everybody gets at some point, and that's low rolling. Sometimes TFT says you're not going to have fun this game if you try to force a comp, and you don't see any units to fit your comp. You roll down all your gold at level 7 and you don't hit a single Silco or Taric 2, and you go somewhere in the bottom 4. So with these 3 different types of games, the key to climbing is to recognise the type of game you're having as early as possible so that you can play differently in order to increase your placement. You need to remember that one 7th or 8th place finish can be worth 4 or 5 games worth of 4th place finishes, so reducing the chances of that is the key to climbing with this comp. So with that out of the way, let's get into the endgame composition. The 2 most important parts to this comp are the items and the positioning. The majority of your damage is over time from Silco's Shimmer, which are the giant pools he throws on the ground. This makes it important to position your team in a way that it clumps up the enemy team to maximise the number of units you're damaging with the pools. By putting Taric in the front line on his own, enemy units will end up wrapping around him, allowing Silco to damage 3 or 4 units with a single pool, but also heal Taric and the secondary tanks of Swain and Shen, as the pool also heals allies. As this comp consists of a single main tank and a single main carry, the 4 key items you must build are the 2 gargoyles on Taric, the blue buff and Hextech gunblade on Silco. Because these items are so important for the comp to work, the only legend that makes this comp viable is TF, and on stage 2-1 you will need to take Pandora's items every single game, regardless of the other augments available, even if it's a Sorcerer related one. Once you've built these 4 items, then the next item is to build a Morello's for Silco to reduce enemy healing, Ionic Spark for Swain to reduce the enemy's MR, and QSS for Taric to ensure he can use his ult to shield. All of these are just as important as each other, so it doesn't matter which you build first, so you should just look to build whichever you can as soon as you can with the items that you get. The great thing about the early game with this comp is that you have lots of options for you to go for. I've picked 6 examples starting from the weakest to the strongest, but of course one of these weaker starts may be stronger if you manage to 2-star some of the units. 9 times out of 10 I level up to 4 at 2-1. Regardless of the starting comp I have built, I've found trying to lose streak to improve econ doesn't work as well with this comp, because with the current meta of Challengers and Demacia, you take way too much damage in the mid game to be able to stabilise. You're much better off preserving health by leveling to 4. At stage 2-5, I almost always level to 5 for the same reason I level to 4 at 2-1, to preserve health. This comp doesn't really come online until you have your 2-star Taric and 1-star Silco at level 7, so our only goal is to survive at this point, and leveling also opens up the rare chance of hitting a Silco or Shen. Then at stage 3-2 you always want to level to 6, and in most cases, unless you're high rolling and very healthy, you roll down to 30 gold to stabilise the board, making sure you have at least 1 2-star carry for your damage items and a bastion for your tank items. The idea here is to have a strong enough board to preserve health and not need to do anything until stage 4-1, which is when we're going to be rolling down for Silco. So here at stage 4-1, we're going to look to level to 7 and roll down for Silco 1 and 2-star any units we haven't already, making sure to hold any additional Tarics or Swains to possibly 3-star them later on, but don't hold any of the units as they're not worth it. One thing to note here is to use the team planner, as it really helps to make sure you don't accidentally miss any units whilst you're rolling. Unless you have a Sorcerer spat to put on your Shen, the next step is to decide between these 3 boards that I'm showing now. They all have their advantages, and I've tried each of them extensively, and I'm still not 100% sure on which is better, but I usually go for the 6 Sorc with Shen, as this gives a big boost to Taric's shield for survivability. Unless you're in a very strong lobby, these boards should be enough to stabilise. It's at this point you should have a good idea on which of the 3 types of games I mentioned earlier that it's going to be. If you're in the middle of the table in terms of health and still winning some rounds but not all, then I would suggest going 8 before rolling down for Silco 2, because the power spike you get from activating Targon and Invoker is huge. But if you're towards the bottom and still losing rounds, then I would econ back up to until stage 4-5, then roll down all of your gold for Silco 2 to try to scrape a 4th place. Remember that going 5th or 6th is nowhere near as bad as 7th or 8th, so it's important to realise when the game just isn't going your way and you need to do whatever you can to protect yourself from the bottom 2 places. So into the late game now, you've hit level 8 and you have Silco 2. There are a few ways you can capture board with this comp. The first is completing all of your key items. You want all 3 items in Taric and Silco, then you want at least 1 MR Shred item like Ionic Spark, but you can take a Shiv to put on Vel'Koz or Ahri. The next is Ahri in place for Malzahar, and putting any additional mana or damage items on her. Finally, the next is a Sorc emblem. If you manage to get a +1 Sorc augment or an emblem, then you can look to go 8 Sorcerers by leveling to 9. If you're fighting for higher placement and you have an emblem or +1, but don't think you have the gold to go for level 9 before you'll die, then you can take out Vel'Koz and put in Aphelios for the extra Targon bonus. And that's it for this guide. I hope you found it helpful. This comp is a lot of fun to play, and I hope you have as much success with it as I did. If you did find this helpful, then please consider liking and subscribing to help support the channel.